The day began like any other for Elijah Benton, whistle blowing through the smoky Pittsburgh station air, boots scuffing the platform, and the faint rumble of an aging locomotive eager for its morning run. The steel rails that stretched endlessly in both directions had been his domain for over 2 decades, but on this particular morning, Elijah carried more than just a punch card and a thermos of black coffee. He carried secrets. Elijah wasn't the kind of man to attract attention. He was quiet, polite, and punctual. His uniform was always pressed, his cap always straight, and his ledger always accurate. If anyone had asked around, they'd have told you, Elijah? He's just a conductor. One of the old ones who never moved up the ladder or moved on. And that was exactly how he liked it. But Elijah had long ago discovered something peculiar, something no one else had seemed to notice. It started years back, on a quiet Tuesday when an elderly passenger left behind a canvas bag under a seat. Elijah, dutiful as always, had handed it in. But curiosity got the better of him just once, and he peeked inside before turning it over. What he found changed everything. Inside wasn't a wallet, or a book, or a sweater, but a neat stack of wrapped bills. Bundled. Crisp. Maybe 30 grand, just sitting there like forgotten lunch. He reported it, of course. Said nothing of the cash. But when no one came for it, the transit authority locked it in a vault and forgot. But Elijah never did. He began to notice things after that. Patterns. The same kinds of bags. The same kinds of people. Men in plain suits who boarded at remote stops and got off before anyone could remember their faces. Sometimes they carried cases that clinked. Other times, packages with handwritten numbers and no labels. Every now and then, something would be left behind. And no one ever came back for them. Elijah had spent the first few years cataloging, recording, and waiting, unsure of what he was uncovering. Drug money. Laundering. Bribes. He never found out. But he discovered something else. No one cared. No one looked twice. The train was a blind spot, a moving purgatory between cities, invisible to the world. So he started collecting. Not stealing. Collecting. Because what was left behind and never claimed? That wasn't theft. That was providence. At least, that's how Elijah justified it to himself in those long nights in his garage, where the bags and bundles were stashed behind hollowed-out toolboxes and under false floorboards. Now, standing at the front of Car 9, Elijah glanced down the rows of passengers boarding for the long haul to Chicago. A woman with a stroller. A man in a tweed coat. 2 teenagers with earbuds in and eyes glazed. Then, near the back, a familiar figure, a man with a gray duffel slung casually over one shoulder, boarding like it was his 5th time this month. Elijah blinked slowly. That bag. It looked like it had weight. Not clothes weight. Money weight. As the train groaned to life and pulled from the station, Elijah's lips formed the faintest hint of a smile. He took out a small black notebook from his coat, turned to a marked page, and added one more notation. Bag spotted. Car 9. Same pattern. Watch after Cleveland. He slipped the notebook back in his pocket, and just like that, the $3.8 million journey continued, unnoticed, unfollowed, and inching ever closer to revelation. As the train chugged past the outskirts of the city, Elijah made his rounds, ticket puncher in hand, nodding courteously to the regulars, offering the occasional ma'am or sir with that quiet, stoic warmth he was known for. But his eyes weren't focused on the faces this time. They were focused on the bag. Row 17, left side. The man in the gray jacket, same demeanor as before. His duffel sat in the aisle seat, zipped, but not fully closed. Elijah caught the glint of something inside. Not metal. More like plastic-wrapped stacks. The same kind he'd seen before. As he approached, he gave the man the same neutral nod. Ticket, please. The man barely looked up. Produced it from his coat. Elijah stamped it, subtly glancing again at the bag. Stopping at Cleveland? Elijah asked. Yeah, the man said, curt. It matched the pattern. Always Cleveland. Always that halfway point, where passengers often shifted, route split, and ticket logs thinned out. It was also where security was weakest and where Elijah had intercepted 2 prior drops. He moved on, but only a few rows ahead. From a narrow panel beneath his conductor seat, Elijah drew out a small inspection slip and began scribbling down minor infractions. Nothing real, but enough to give him reason to linger in that section. He'd done this before. Many times. And he knew, if the man got up before Cleveland and didn't take the bag, that would be his moment. The hum of the train smoothed into a rhythm as miles passed. Elijah kept watch through the polished glass door leading into Car 9. The man fiddled with his phone, got up once to stretch, but didn't bring the bag. Elijah's heartbeat picked up just slightly. Then, an hour before Cleveland, the moment came. The man stood, yawned, stretched his arms behind his back, and casually strolled toward the lavatory, without the bag. Elijah stood immediately. He moved down the aisle like he was checking vents, a routine maintenance check. He passed a nod to a woman reading a book, then stood next to the duffel. It was half-zipped, the weight unmistakable. He slid his clipboard between the seats, flipped the top open just an inch, enough to see it. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly rubber-banded and packed in rows like a suitcase full of bricks. He closed it gently, turned back, and walked on as if nothing had happened. But something was different this time. In his notebook, under today's date, he didn't just write, "Bag spotted." He wrote, "Pickup possible. Man is decoy." Because as he passed Car 10 moments later, he spotted another man. Dressed similarly. Not quite identical, but close. Same posture. And in the overhead bin above him, another gray duffel, nearly identical. Elijah's instincts kicked in. This wasn't a single drop. It was a double. Maybe even more. A coordinated run. Back in the small utility room behind the engineer's booth, Elijah unlatched the false floorboard and took out a laminated map of the route. He had marked it years ago, mapping all the strange drops and odd disappearances. But now, for the first time, he connected 2 new points. "Dual bait," he whispered. "Or double blind." He sat back, wheels turning. He'd always been careful. Never took more than 1 bag a quarter. Spread out over years, it added up, slow, steady, invisible. But now, this was something new. Someone was using his train like a bank. And he wasn't sure if they knew he knew. Elijah had a system. He wasn't a thief in the traditional sense. He never broke into anything. He never threatened, never lifted so much as a candy bar from the train cafe. But he noticed. Patterns, people, bags, all filed away in the back of his mind like bookmarks. That ledger he kept. It was locked inside a hollowed-out maintenance manual tucked in the conductor's locker. Worn pages. Handwritten codes. He never labeled amounts outright. He wasn't that careless. But G9.17 meant Car 9, row 17, likely a bag drop. R7X meant a retrieval point where he had successfully replaced the bag with a decoy. He flipped to a new page. G9.17. Double drop. 2 targets. Timing irregular. Evaluate risk. He took a deep breath and looked around. The rhythm of the train lulled most passengers to sleep. Those still awake were absorbed in books, earbuds, or the flicker of their tablet screens. All was quiet, deceptively peaceful. But Elijah's mind was sprinting. Why were there 2 this time? In all his years watching these mysterious money bags come and go, they'd always followed a pattern. 1 duffel, 1 drop-off. Sometimes weekly. Sometimes bi-weekly. Never clustered. Never this, brazen. He knew someone was laundering money through the trains. Maybe cartels. Maybe syndicates. He didn't care. He never got involved, just intercepted the ones that went unclaimed. Or the ones whose handlers made careless mistakes. Like now. He paced slowly back to Car 10. The second gray bag was still in the bin above the man pretending to nap. Elijah lingered near the emergency panel just a few rows away, flipping switches to test the dimmer lights, an excuse to observe. That's when he noticed it. The napper was faking. His breathing was too rhythmic, too exaggerated. And more importantly, he peeked, just for a second, as Elijah passed. Not a regular. Not even close. Elijah's gut twisted. This wasn't a run-of-the-mill drop. This was bait. A setup. Back in the staff galley, Elijah sat in the jump seat and stared at the emergency protocol pamphlet as if reading. But his mind was reviewing everything: the decoy, the fake sleeper, the timing. The rules had changed. He looked down at the small radio pinned to his belt. Standard train comms. If he made a move, there could be eyes waiting at Cleveland. Plain clothes. Surveillance. DA. Homeland Security. He didn't panic. He adapted. Elijah took out his cleaning cart, a real one this time, and rolled it casually toward Car 9. It squeaked just enough to be annoying, masking the soft pad of his shoes. He stopped by the gray bag. Still unattended. If they're watching me, he thought, they'll expect me to take it. So he didn't. He opened the top, slipped in a small device, a wireless RFID tracker from a lost-and-found project he'd been working on, then zipped it shut again. Let them pick it up. Let them move it. He'd follow. At Cleveland, the man in the gray jacket stood as expected. He retrieved the duffel, glanced once down the aisle, at Elijah, and nodded as if nothing was wrong. Elijah, hands deep in his pockets, returned the nod, deadpan. But when the man stepped off onto the platform and faded into the crowd, Elijah already had his laptop out, connected to a private Wi-Fi signal bouncing from a repeater hidden behind the train cafe fridge. He tracked the blinking dot on his screen. The bag was moving. Southbound. By car. Not police. Not sting. Real transport. And that meant the other bag in car 10 was fake. Elijah smiled for the first time in hours, and turned his eyes back toward the second gray bag, still overhead, still untouched. Elijah waited. Not the kind of waiting you do when you're killing time. This was surgical patience. The kind where every breath is measured. Every blink is timed. Passengers were clearing out. The ones who got off at Cleveland moved like they always did, dragging luggage, yawning into phones, shuffling toward coffee kiosks. Nothing screamed, federal agent. No unmarked black SUVs. No shoulder holsters peeking from jackets. The napper was gone. The real bag was gone. But this bag, the decoy in car 10, still sat there like a trap with a chewed-off paw inside. Elijah casually leaned into the overhead compartment, wiped down the metal bar with a cloth, and stared inside the unclaimed duffel. It hadn't moved. No zippers tampered with. No tags. No signs. He opened it anyway. Inside. Nothing. Not nothing as in empty. Nothing as in wrong. Neatly folded gym clothes. A sealed protein shake. Deodorant. Phone charger. Everything a person traveling on short notice might carry. Too perfect. Too clean. Too convenient. Elijah's eyes narrowed. Then he saw it, tucked into the base lining, underneath a Velcro flap most people wouldn't bother inspecting. A camera. Tiny. Black. Activated. Live. Elijah's breath hitched, not in fear, but in revelation. He zipped the bag shut calmly, set it back into the compartment, and moved down the aisle. No one looked up. They weren't baiting him to take the bag. They were watching to see who would. In the dim blue lighting of the staff car, Elijah flipped open his old Nokia, a burner phone he only used twice a year. He texted a number with no name attached. Bag 2, surveillance confirmed. They're adapting. Train 2181. Car 10. Abort all future intercepts for 90 days. He hit send and destroyed the SIM. For 10 years, Elijah had moved like a ghost through the seams of the rail system, collecting forgotten drops, sometimes intercepting bags meant for people who never showed up. Other times he simply watched and logged. A curator of secrets. A silent historian of shadow money. But now, the ghosts were hunting him back. He had rules. Always rules. And Rule 1, disappear before the rules disappear on you. At the next stop, a replacement conductor joined. Elijah handed off the ledger, disguised as an incident report binder, to the new guy with a nod. Just logs, he said. Same as always. Then he left. Not to his car. Not to a hotel. He walked straight through the station, into a back alley, and into the side door of a nondescript warehouse. Inside, a wall of lockers. He opened number 19. Inside was a new uniform. A badge. A fresh ID, all real. Not forged. Transferred. Elijah had identities on rotation, real ones he'd earned through obscure city programs, gig jobs, and temp agencies. He was now Raymond Holt, a part-time loading dock supervisor for a frozen seafood distributor. The train world wouldn't see him again for months. Maybe longer. He sat in the corner of the locker room and opened a tiny lockbox. Inside was a USB stick labeled Crow's Nest, his own archive of intercepted bags, location trends, laundering patterns, and internal rail manifests going back over a decade. He plugged it into an encrypted tablet and watched the screen light up. Total intercepted value since 2012, $3.82 million. Unclaimed, unguarded, unmissed, cash, diamonds, rare metals, bonds, all logged, all stored, all untouched. Until now. Because Elijah had no intention of dying a train conductor. And the real bag, the real $280,000 duffel now driving south through Ohio, was just another page in his ledger. One more whisper in the dark. There was a myth in the underground. A whisper among porters, luggage runners, and freight workers. They called him the shadow man of the rails, a ghost who never showed his face, but always knew when a bag changed hands. No one knew his name. No one had proof he was real. Except the ones who paid him. Because Elijah didn't just intercept drops. He curated a network, a decentralized hive of watchers scattered across state lines, inside cleaning crews, maintenance teams, and food service vendors. He never recruited. He just found people. Ones who owed too much. Who saw too much. Who wanted out. He gave them a rule. Watch. Don't touch. Report only what's out of place. And when one of those people pinged him the week before about double bags being placed on certain eastbound lines, one real, one fake, Elijah knew the syndicates were evolving. But so was he. Back in his safe house, a modest windowless apartment above an abandoned locksmith shop, Elijah opened a steel suitcase and counted cash, slowly. Bundles labeled by train number. Wrapped in rubber bands. Neat. He paused at one stack, Train 4315, the first bag he ever claimed. It wasn't greed that started it. 10 years ago, someone left a black leather duffel in a seat across from him during a routine security sweep. No ID. No tag. Just a note inside that read, "This is yours now. You don't know me. I won't come back." Elijah reported it. But no one ever claimed it. It was destroyed. So the next time it happened, different train, same duffel, he didn't report it. Inside, $73,000 in neat stacks of untraceable cash. From that moment on, Elijah understood something. The rails were leaking. Money. Secrets. Transactions. And no one was watching close enough to stop it. So he did. He didn't keep all the cash. That wasn't the game. He invested in watchers, built safe routes, encrypted databases, side businesses. A shell trucking company in Kentucky. A forgotten storage unit in Nebraska. A river ferry operation in Michigan. Everything was legal, at least on paper. But now the enemy was adapting. And Elijah had just spotted the first counterstrike. Surveillance bags. Trap bags. Observers on the train. They wanted to see who would bite. Who would blink. Who would break the pattern. But Elijah had already vanished, layered behind 6 identities, ghost employment records, and travel logs that showed he hadn't even been on the train for weeks. Let them look. They'd find nothing. Late that night, Elijah opened a private feed from the RFID tracker he planted earlier. The gray bag, the real one, had stopped at a warehouse in West Virginia. He zoomed in on the map. No logo. No signage. A dead zone. He marked the coordinates. Not to follow, but to sell. Because someone would pay to know where the real bag ended up. Someone on the other side of this laundry line. Maybe cartel. Maybe rival. Elijah didn't care. He never touched the money. He just watched it move. The warehouse in West Virginia wasn't marked on any commercial freight manifest. From the outside, it looked like a storage depot, rusted fences, 2 burnt-out floodlights, a security camera hanging dead from a bent pole. But inside was a private staging ground for the cash drops that never showed up on manifests. And Elijah knew exactly who ran it, a man called Kern, ex-military, dishonorably discharged, and now the logistics point man for one of the Eastern Rail Corridor's dirtiest laundering channels. Kern was meticulous. Never used phones. Communicated through dead drops, colored zip ties on random mailboxes, crossed chalk lines on certain warehouse bricks, or burnt matchsticks left inside vending machines. But Elijah had cracked Kern's rhythm years ago. That's how he'd stayed ahead. And this time, Elijah wasn't going in alone. Earlier that week, Elijah had made contact with a man known only as Tay. Tay was a private security contractor who'd grown tired of working for corrupt companies. He'd caught on to a rail car disappearing off logs for 17 minutes every week. Curious, he dug deeper. What he found was Kern's operation. What he didn't have was access. That's where Elijah came in. The plan was simple. Tay would pose as a temporary freight loader, complete with fake documentation Elijah had provided, and blend in for 3 days inside the West Virginia facility. Elijah, meanwhile, monitored every move via drone, satellite uplink, and a hacked internal CCTV relay from an electrical pole a half-mile away. On day 2, at exactly 3:15 a.m., Tay spotted it. The man in the orange vest. He wasn't on any rotation. No one talked to him. He arrived just before the moneybags did. He walked alone, always toward the eastern corner of the facility, where no cameras pointed. Tay followed him with his eyes only. And Elijah, watching from a grainy feed, made a note. Orange vest equals money transfer verification agent. Then something unexpected happened. On the third night, Orange Vest stopped halfway through the warehouse, looked directly at one of the security cameras, the one Elijah was hijacking, and gave a small nod. It was almost imperceptible. But Elijah saw it. And then, the feed went black. No static. No flicker. Just darkness. They'd found the tap. Elijah's heart didn't race. He didn't panic. This had happened once before, 6 years ago in a rail yard outside Minneapolis. That time, he'd barely escaped a setup. But he learned something important. If they knew you were watching, they were about to move. Which meant now was the time to strike. Elijah sent Tay a single word via a secure text burst. Exit. And as planned, Tay slipped out of the warehouse's back entrance, walked 4 blocks north, and ditched his uniform in a storm drain. He wouldn't be returning. Not for now. But they had what they came for. The timing of the bag deliveries. The man in the orange vest. The exact GPS coordinates of a building Kern never wanted on a map. And Elijah. He now had enough leverage to make a trade. Or blow the entire thing up. It arrived 3 days after the warehouse blackout. A plain, manila envelope, no return address, no stamps. Just left in Elijah's locked P.O. box at a station he hadn't used in 5 years. Inside, only 3 things. 1. A Polaroid photograph of Elijah and Tay standing near the storm drain. 2. A train schedule. But not just any schedule, one of his own freight lines, but with 5 stops circled in red ink. 3. A post-it note with a single typed sentence. You're not the only one who can watch. Elijah exhaled. This was Kern's way of saying back off. But it was also a confession, they knew. That meant they were scared. And fear makes people sloppy. He burned the photo, memorized the circled stops, and flushed the paper down a diner toilet off Route 29. The 5 stops were in different states. A Harrisonburg, Virginia. A Glen Willow, Ohio. A Lake Bluff, Illinois. A West Plains, Missouri. A Mesilla Park, New Mexico. Each one had a ghost cart, a disconnected train car that appeared on manifests but never carried any freight. Most employees didn't even notice them. But Elijah did. He had for years. The money, he now knew, moved across state lines via these ghost carts. No fingerprints, no serial numbers. Just untraceable weight listed as maintenance supplies. But now they were using his schedule. His train. That night, Elijah opened the old ledger again, the same one he kept hidden in a hollowed-out compartment behind his bathroom mirror. Inside were timestamps, names of overnight shift workers, notations on car numbers, and in the back, a list titled, Debt Paid, Unofficial Bonuses. There were 46 entries. each one matched to a stop, and a corresponding amount scribbled beside them in pencil. The total, $3,817,200. Every dollar he'd taken wasn't from greed. It had been from deals like this, where cart number 1187 would arrive light and leave heavy, or where empty containers would need sealing assistance from trusted employees who never asked questions. Over the years, it grew. And now, someone was trying to loop him back in. Elijah made a decision. He took a red marker and circled one of the 5 locations on the schedule. Glen Willow, Ohio. He knew that yard like the back of his hand. More importantly, he knew who still worked there, a quiet old stationmaster named Marcus Boone, a man who used to say, "If anyone ever tries to erase your trail, make them trip over your footprint." Elijah folded the schedule, grabbed his weathered satchel, and packed just 2 things. A burner phone. And a flash drive labeled Conductor's Cut. As he walked to his truck, he muttered under his breath, "You wanted my attention, Kern? You've got it now." It was 2:36 a.m. when Elijah pulled up to the Glen Willow rail yard. The place hadn't changed. Same chain-link gate wrapped in decades of rust. Same flickering sodium lights that bathed the old train cars in a hazy amber glow. But what had changed, what had shifted, was the rhythm. This yard used to breathe. Now, it was holding its breath. Elijah didn't enter through the main lot. He knew the back route, a gravel path that ran parallel to Track 6. There, behind a stack of decommissioned boxcars, was a narrow space just wide enough to slip through without triggering motion sensors. And waiting by a burnt-out floodlight, sipping from a thermos, was Marcus Boone. The old man looked up, his thick gray beard glowing in the night like smoke under moonlight. "You look like hell, Eli." "That makes 2 of us," Elijah said, grinning. They embraced briefly, 2 ghosts reuniting where they'd first learned the secrets of the steel arteries that crossed America. Inside Boone's makeshift office, a gutted caboose retrofitted with a coffee pot, blueprints, and more surveillance gear than the NSA, Elijah laid out the Glen Willow stop map. "They're circling this yard now," he said. "I don't know if I'm being warned, tested, or recruited." Boone didn't speak for a long time. Then he walked over to a rusted filing cabinet, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a folder labeled Incident 12F. "Eli, this isn't new. 5 years ago, a shipment came through here, no manifest, no crew listed. Car 2974. I thought it was a glitch, until I peeked inside." Elijah leaned in. What was in it? Shrink-wrapped pallets. Hundreds of them. No labels. Just black tape around the edges. And the weight matched what a shipment of unmarked bills would be. They both knew what that meant. This wasn't just money laundering. This was federal money, siphoned, sanitized, and redeployed through logistical ghosts. And Elijah had been unknowingly steering pieces of it for years. Marcus pointed to the train roster. "They're sending another ghost cart through this yard tomorrow night. 2:11 a.m. They've changed the car number, but not the route." "And the destination?" "Messiah Park." Elijah nodded. That was the 5th circled location. If he followed this cart, he could learn where the final payout was headed, or who was really behind the ledger Kern had only partially revealed. They rigged a small tracker, military grade, one Boone had salvaged from his brief time with private security. Elijah would plant it on the undercarriage of the ghost cart. But more importantly, he'd leave a calling card inside. A small silver button, the kind only conductors wore. His initials etched faintly on the back. If Kern found it, he'd know Elijah was done hiding. That night, after the cart was logged as maintenance supply, no entry, Elijah slipped into the shadows and crouched by the coupling mechanism. He clipped the tracker, and then, slowly, opened the heavy cargo door. Inside was a wall of crates. Black tape. No labels. Exactly like Boone described. Elijah smiled grimly, placed the silver button on the nearest crate, and sealed the door shut. As the ghost cart rumbled off into the dark, Elijah whispered into the wind. "You ran the tracks. I laid them. Let's see who derails first." Elijah arrived at the edge of what was supposed to be Messiah Park, a freight checkpoint listed on the old train manifest. But there was nothing there. No loading docks. No crew. No storage containers. Not even tracks that led to anything functional. Just a desert basin and a slab of concrete half buried under sand. He stood there for a long time, the wind whipping at his jacket, dust clinging to his boots. Something about this place whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." He double-checked the coordinates. They matched the destination logged from the tracker he'd placed in Glenwillow. The ghost cart had stopped here, exactly 2:47 a.m. But where was the infrastructure? He walked the perimeter, careful not to leave a clear trail. That's when he noticed a faint humming beneath his feet. Mechanical. Electrical. Subterranean. Elijah followed the sound to a rusted ventilation grate lodged between a tumble of rock and rebar. He dropped to one knee, pressed his ear to the metal. There were voices. Distant. Indistinct. But definitely below ground. There was a hidden compound underneath Messiah Park. And whoever built it had erased any trace from satellite views, federal maps, and train logistics. It was a black site, likely one used by the same people Kern once worked for. And that meant the money wasn't being stolen. It was being moved here. Hidden. For something big. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He returned to a nearby ghost town 8 miles out, an abandoned mining village named Cimarron Flats, where Boone had once stashed an old scout drone in a boarded-up saloon. The drone, a relic from his surveillance days, still worked. By morning, it was flying high above Messiah Park, scanning for thermal readings and underground access points. And what it captured was chilling. A freight elevator camouflaged under a sand-covered hatch. 4 armed men patrolling what looked like camouflaged vents. A convoy truck, same markings as the Phantom cars, leaving with no license plates. Elijah knew he was out of his depth. But this wasn't about curiosity anymore. This was about survival. Because whoever ran that underground facility had started cleaning up their loose ends. And he had just left them a silver button with his name on it. Later that day, a message popped up on the old burner Boone had given him. No number. Just text. You always were a smart conductor. But trains that run too long eventually derail. There was an attachment. It was a photo of Boone, bound to a chair, blood on his collar, eyes wide. Elijah dropped the phone. His stomach sank like steel. They'd found Boone. And now they were coming for him too. And if he didn't end this, if he didn't flip the tracks, he wouldn't just lose the money. He'd lose everything. Elijah stared at Boone's photo for hours. The look in his friend's eyes wasn't one of fear, it was urgency. Boone had risked everything to pull him into this web. Now he was inside the trap, and Elijah was the only one left on the outside. But not for long. He knew what he had to do. Find the manifest. The original records. The real ones, the silent manifest, passed from conductor to conductor, coded and hand-scribed in a tattered black notebook no railway database ever logged. It was rumored to contain unregistered routes, special cargo codes, ghost track coordinates, and a cipher for reading clandestine handovers. Only one person might know where it was, Inez Delgado, a retired engineer who once disappeared for 13 months, only to reappear with a gold watch, a limp, and enough silence to bury a mountain. Elijah tracked her to an off-grid trailer in the northern edge of Utah, hidden behind a rust-colored canyon and a crooked "No Trespassing" sign painted on a fridge door. Inez answered with a shotgun in one hand and a welding torch in the other. "You brought ghosts, didn't you?" she said before he could speak. Elijah nodded. "They took Boone." She sighed. "Then you better come inside." Her trailer was a museum of secrets. Photos of trains from the 70s with blacked-out carriages. Stacks of old schematics and blueprints. And a sealed vault buried beneath a loose panel under the stove. From it, she pulled the silent manifest, wrapped in leather, smelling of oil and old storms. She flipped through pages like decoding a map only she knew how to read. Then she looked up. "You weren't the first conductor they chose. You were the first who asked why." Elijah's throat tightened. "What were we moving, Inez?" She handed him the book and tapped a passage. He read it aloud. Payload 73, Messiah transfer. Cargo classification, not for manifest. Escort order, Echo unit. Handler, The Quiet Broker. Purpose, Preservation Protocol. What does that mean? He whispered. She closed the book. It means you've been hauling the same shipment for years without knowing it. And someone's about to erase you from every log ever written. Elijah left at dawn, the manifest tucked inside his jacket. His plan was simple now. Break back into the underground site. Find Boone. Expose the cargo. Flip the whole operation before they could bury him with it. But back in New Mexico, the Messiah site had vanished. No hatch. No heat signature. No tracks. Only a flat slab of scorched earth, like the desert had swallowed it whole. Except for one thing left behind. A single rail spike, polished, engraved with 2 words. Next stop. Elijah gripped the rail spike like it was a message from the underworld. Next stop. That could only mean one thing in the language of the underground. There was another station. Another layer. Another game. And one man controlled the board. The broker was a myth even among train conductors who whispered of strange cargo and undocumented stops. He didn't work for the rail company, the government, or any nation-state. He worked for the balance, a self-imposed order where truths were hidden under rails and fortunes changed hands without a word. You didn't find the broker. He found you. Unless you were willing to break the one rule every conductor knew. Abandon your route. Elijah took a detour that night, one the system wouldn't recognize. He bypassed the city loop, then triggered a switch hidden beneath mile marker 204, just like Inez had described. The rails curved where they weren't supposed to. And suddenly, he was on a line not listed on any map. His headlights pierced through a long-forgotten tunnel. And waiting in the center of the track was a man in a charcoal-gray trench coat. No face. Just presence. Elijah stopped the train. The man boarded. The broker sat across from him in the cabin, quiet as fog. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I was there when Boone disappeared," Elijah replied. "I deserve to know why." "You deserve to keep breathing." "I want the truth." A long pause. Then the broker tapped the control panel, and all the lights on the train dimmed. One by one, old footage began to play on the monitors. A Boone offloading crates labeled Art Restoration, only they held sealed steel canisters. Engineers handing off briefcases to men in military fatigues with no insignia. Elijah himself, walking past compartment 7 for 6 years, never realizing it was twice the length from the outside. Then came the final clip. A younger Elijah, asleep at the switchboard, while 2 men in white coats injected something into the engine core. The broker spoke. "You weren't just hauling money, Elijah. You were the control group." Elijah's stomach twisted. What was in the cargo? The broker leaned closer. Patents. Cures. Technologies. Truths. Things that could have reset economies. They call it the vault freight. You were the only one who never peaked. That's why they trusted you. Elijah stood. "I want out. I want Boone back. And I want a clean name." The broker smiled, a cold, surgical thing. "Then you'll need to do one last run." "Where?" "To the final terminal." "Where's that?" The broker slid a small steel card across the panel. Elijah turned it over. One word, laser-etched in perfect lines. Judgment. The train was silent except for the rhythmic churn of steel over tracks. Elijah sat alone, the broker gone like a ghost, leaving only the steel card with a single word etched into it. Judgment. No map. No coordinates. Just a feeling, like the tracks themselves would decide when and where the final stop would be. The night outside grew thicker. Trees disappeared. Tunnels gave way to vast blackness. And then, as if the world took a deep breath, the train rolled into a place that didn't exist on any map. A terminal, abandoned yet humming. Lights flickered to life one by one, revealing crates stacked to the ceiling, each stamped with federal seals, university logos, and emblems of organizations Elijah couldn't pronounce. He stepped off the train. Boone was there, standing under a hanging lamp, older, thinner, but very much alive. "Elijah," he said like he'd just seen him yesterday. "What is this place?" Boone gestured around. "This is where everything they never wanted the world to see ends up." He walked Elijah past rows of suppressed technology, cold fusion prototypes, cancer aggressors, zero-gravity chips, and files marked obsolete due to greed. "They sent me here because I knew too much," Boone continued. "But I've kept track of every manifest, every crate, every dollar." Elijah blinked. "And the $3.8 million? Boone smiled. "They paid you with silence, Eli. Each bundle came marked Operational Hush. They knew you'd never ask questions." Elijah's voice cracked. "Why didn't you ever come back?" "Because they didn't just pay you, they recruited you." The sound of a whistle echoed through the cavernous terminal. Another train was coming. Boone grabbed his arm. "This is your chance. You can expose it all. Or you can disappear with me. The world above doesn't care what we've carried." Elijah's hand went to the ledger in his coat. Every shipment, every date, every account number. Boone had given him everything. Another whistle. The tunnel pulsed with red light. Two options: board the ghost train and vanish forever, or walk away and blow it wide open. He chose neither. Elijah set the ledger on the terminal floor, opened a crate, and grabbed one item, a black box with a blinking red core. He threw it onto the rails and stepped back. The explosion was small but exact. The rail line to the terminal collapsed in a cascade of molten iron and concrete. There would be no more shipments. No more suppression. Then he turned to Boone. "Let's go home." 3 months later, a leaked USB drive made its way to a small journalist in Pittsburgh. It contained shipment logs, GPS records, and the location of the Vault Freight terminal. Governments denied it. Corporations panicked. And somewhere in Utah, 2 men opened a roadside diner that only accepted exact change. Inside, a dusty train spike hung on the wall beside a sign. "We've stopped running. But the truth, it never sleeps."